you a musician interested in improving your performance? Welcome to Notes on Jazz. I'm your host, Keith Davis. If you want to learn more about jazz improvisation, harmony, and composition, or just want to improve your piano skills, this is the place for you. We'll be hosting interviews with fellow musicians, offering tips and techniques on study and practice, and lots of other cool stuff. Whatever instrument you play, or if you're a vocalist, you will find something helpful and interesting here. So come hang out with us at Notes on Jazz. Welcome to Notes on Jazz. I'm Keith Davis. I'm here with David Berkman. He's a great pianist, composer, educator. This is not the first time that I've spoken on Zoom with David. I'm just looking back to see, I actually had a lesson with David, and it was October 16th, almost exactly 2 years ago. How about that?
Wow, you're almost due for another one. I like to have students come once every 2 years, roughly.
Yeah. That's about as much as I can retain, I think.
You're a pro who is just more of a conversation than a lesson.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but it was enlightening though for me.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I got a lot of information out of it. In fact, I would like to have another conversation about that and follow up on it some. So,
sure. Yeah.
We were talking about something, topic from your book, actually. I have your book right here. I'm going to start plugging your stuff right away.
Oh, wow. Excellent.
The Jazz Harmony book by David. This is a great book for jazz, for jazz students. I ask or require, don't require, but I strongly request that all my students get this book and we use it in our lessons. So I was actually, it was really helpful to me because I was already thinking the same way as far as teaching. I was, went back to starting with here from the very beginning, triad harmony, and because nobody taught me that. I didn't learn that from anybody growing up. I didn't, even my jazz teachers, quote unquote jazz teachers, they didn't teach me that stuff. So when I really started teaching people myself and realized that there were some real fundamental things that I didn't understand very well, I went back and started thinking through all this stuff for myself. Mm-hmm. Building up, teaching myself from the ground up about how harmony works. And when I found your book, it was just perfect timing because you're talking about all the same things and you lay it out very well. And it's a great book. I really recommend it for everyone. So,
thank you.
Thank you. So, and also, I want to say a couple things about you, just an introduction.
Sure.
I said he's a wonderful pianist and composer. He's been in New York City for a long time. We're going to talk about your background and I'm going to ask you some questions. And he's also an educator, teaches at Queens College in New York, and a very good educator, I know from personal experience. So you've got several books out. We'll talk about some of that. You have an extensive discography of recordings under your own name, which is great. In fact, I went and I downloaded your latest solo piano album last night. I've been listening to it this morning. It's very nice.
Okay. Oh, thanks.
Actually, to start there, I'm really curious. How did you decide on pairing Pete Seeger and John Coltrane?
So I had a few solo projects. I mean, I really love solo piano playing, and it's like it's sort of an ongoing, project. And especially, I have to say, in these, pandemic times, that was really a great thing that piano players had, which was, we could actually perform and we could continue to work on something that's really performance based. So, it's kind of a funny thing because you practice playing solo all the time because practicing is solo. Right. But when you're thinking about it in terms of like an actual project or an actual something that you want to perform or a recording that you want to make, it's different. And I'm sure that I had because of some of these recordings I've done a few solo tours, mostly in Japan, which is kind of a second home for me in a way. My wife is Japanese and we spend a lot of time there. But when you do a tour like for 10 days of like 10 solo concerts, it does something interesting for your solo playing because normally we don't have that kind of focused venue for performing solo music. So anyway, and also just to finish the thought, we have, in a lot of, when I was coming up, a lot of gigs that I did that were solo gigs were essentially background music at hotels or something like that. It was like kind of now that's a great opportunity too. And you can do a lot with that, but because you're that's somewhere in between sort of practicing and perform. It's a performance that has like a certain kind of constraint on it because it's not people just sitting and listening to you. And that's it's an interesting thing what influence having people listen to you does to your music. I think so anyway. Okay, so I had these solo projects that I've been doing. I did my first record, I think, in my first solo record in 2012, and it was just a collection of standards mostly and a few original tunes, and I think some free pieces also thrown in. But anyway, this second one, I'd had this idea. I wanted to do the music of Coltrane because I thought, well, that's something solo piano players don't do that much in that kind of way, like to do all Coltrane tunes. And I ended up having about 6 tunes that I really wanted to play. And you go into the studio and some of them come out better than others, right? So I had about a half a record of Coltrane stuff that I wanted to do. And then I'd also been, when I started working on counterpoint in more seriously in my solo playing, I was attracted to hymns and simple songs because that gives you lots of space to kind of fill in this sort of counterpoint harmony counterpoint without so much constant, chord changes and harmony. Sometimes the chord changes actually help because it gives voices something to do. But in this case, I kind of was enjoying like playing really simple tunes that way. And I have a lot of Pete Seeger in my sort of childhood and past, like my father and my father played guitar and sang, and he was also an amateur jazz piano player. When I was a kid, I played guitar also, and I liked during the Grape Boycott, I would, go to grocery stores with a friend of mine who played banjo, and so he had this little like social activist kind of thing. Anyway, I sort of liked a lot of the values of folk music, and of course, Pete Seeger was kind of a sort of heroic figure in some ways. Anyway, so I had this music of Pete Seeger, and I was on a gig with a drummer named Matt Wilson, who is a very funny person. And I said, yeah, I want to do this, Pete Seeger record, and I want to do this Coltrane record. He said, man, you should do the music of Pete Seeger and John Coltrane. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting combination. So that's how it kind of, and so it really just sort of worked out felicitously. And then the thing that was interesting about it is when I was recording it, there's actually kind of a lot of similarities because it's both music of the 60s and Train has a lot of very, hymn oriented qualities. And of course he was also a real social activist, so it's kind of like, there's kind of a through line with both of them. So I really enjoyed, having that music talk to each other. And in the end of that record, I do a very sort of contemplative version of Giant Steps that lasts a really long time and goes really slow. And so it's like, I don't think I probably would have done that if I hadn't been doing the other simpler music. So it was sort of created an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I haven't quite. Giant Steps was just loading up when I started. So I'm going to listen to that after that talk that we have.
Cool. Well, I hope you like it. Anyway.
So you mentioned the counterpoint. That's something else that I work on too in my solo. I play at a hotel actually a few nights a week.
Right. I remember that, and I didn't mean to disparage that.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's great. I mean, some nights I actually have people listening, and some nights I have nobody listening. So. But I noticed what you said about counterpoint. I noticed a lot of that on your this latest for solo recording. That's something else that I work on a lot too when I'm playing solo. I think it's really interesting. It gives your left hand more. I don't know. It's sort of like when you turn your left hand loose and let it do stuff. It can
sure.
Yeah, that you didn't know it could do.
Definitely. Yeah, I think so. Fred Hirsch has sort of been like a big. Impetus for that kind of playing and also Brad Meldau and like some other contemporary piano players who do a lot of that. So I think it's interesting and I like it. It's funny, I play a lot. Sometimes I play duos with my friend Bruce Barth, great piano player, and we'll talk about that. And one of the things he always thinks is, well, I don't want to put words in his mouth. I'm sure he likes counterpoint. You can't not like counterpoint. But his one point that he often makes with his students is that it's important to have like a storytelling thing. And the counterpoint sometimes can overwhelm the story of your solo, I think sometimes. Like, what's the direction of the melodic, So it's an interesting thing. It's like anything else. It's something you have to really balance.
It's like a
But
balance. Yeah,
it
it's like
is,
yourself riding a bike or something. It's balance.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of my, it's one thing I definitely work on and come back to and then stop. And then, it's something that's definitely been happening over the last, whatever, 10 or 15 years in my playing.
Yeah, that's interesting because same thing. Like I said, same thing for me. That's what I notice. The most.
Yeah, I think it was one of those things that was very much in the air in jazz music. I think it was, because of, so many players who were going in that direction, and I think at a similar time. So
Yeah, right, great. So let me ask you about your background a little bit. I understand you're from.
it's blurry. That's a filter, actually. Oh, I'm sorry.
Your background is blurry. Yeah, I can't remember.
And as I get older and older, your background does get blurrier. That's what happens. Anyway, sorry.
No, funny. So you're from Cleveland, I think.
I am.
Cleveland,
Ohio.
Great. Yeah. And was there much of a scene there when you were coming up? How did you
Yeah,
start?
I mean, I think Cleveland was one of those cities maybe Detroit was a little more active, but still like Cleveland, Detroit, Pittsburgh, there were all these kind of Rust Belt towns that had, a lot of great players that came from them. From Cleveland, we had, in the past, Tad Dameron was from Cleveland, and actually Tad Dameron's influence you would actually feel in Cleveland because there was a great arranger named Willie Smith who actually later arranged for Joe Lovano, who is also from Cleveland, and it was kind of this Tad Dameron style, this sort of post or like this hard bop or whatever you want to call it, kind of bebop arranging style, and you would hear that actually in a lot of the in arrangements that arrangers were doing from there. And there was a scene of older players. There was a great guitar player named Bill D'Arango who played with Dizzy Gillespie and Ben Webster, and he had a sort of he was like a kind of a teacher. He was a really interesting player. He played on 52nd Street with Ben Webster and his band, and later he came to move back home to Cleveland. But a lot of the guys in New York still knew him, so he would sit in sometimes, like with Miles Davis when he came through town, and he got really influenced by like sort of Miles's like freer kind of thing. So he had this really unusual style that sort of spanned he sounded sort of like a swing oriented guitar player in some ways, but he also sounded kind of like free Miles. He had a Thunderbird guitar. And it was just like he was this sort of eccentric guy. He recorded, kind of an amazing musician, and he recorded also with Kenny Werner and Joe Lovano in the 90s, I think. There's a great record of that.
Again, I'm going to write his name down.
Yeah, Bill D'Arango.
Okay. All right.
Dearango.
Yeah.
Rango.
Oh,
yeah, he's just a really eccentric and interesting musician. And there were, I think, in a lot of these towns, there are great musicians in every city in the country. And I think sometimes you get more. What I think happens sometimes in small scenes is there's not enough for everybody to do. You're not going to find like a Blakey oriented band or like a super modern ECM band or like with enough players to play all the parts in them. So everybody kind of does everything, and that was a great experience for me coming up. I would at the time when I was in Cleveland, I was really into Bud. That's what I was trying to play, like Bud Powell and that kind of style. And I would get called to go play a funk gig. And it was like, okay, Bud Powell and the funk gig. It's sort of like, it was, but. The other nice thing about it was...
anyway, you were talking about Cleveland and some of the great players.
Yeah, so there's there were always a lot of interesting players, older players. I guess the other thing I started to say is I was coming up, I was like, I'm from Cleveland, so I guess I started playing when I was in my teens, but then when I was in college, I would come back and play in the summers. And after I finished college, I went back to Cleveland and I played around town there. And it was, it was Sonny Stitt came through town, and the three piano players who were competent, were all busy or out of town or something. And so I played with him for 4 nights when I was 20 years old. It's like I was able to have those kind of experiences, which were so amazing, and there were some great older players. Jamie Haddad is a fine percussionist and drummer. And Greg Bandy is another one, a great organ drummer, kind of a Harlem. He played a lot in Harlem with people like Mulgrew and, a lot of organ players. And I think he played more recently with Pharaoh before he passed. So, it was like there were some really inspiring people to play with, and there were few enough players that a young player would get a chance. So I think that was a very nice thing about that town, and also, the values of this kind of hard bop and post bop kind of world, so you'd play with, also the other nice thing about it is there were sort of black clubs and there were white clubs, and you played everywhere because, again, there were not so many piano players. And, if you're playing in the black clubs, maybe it would be a little bit different, groove focused, or, you might be playing some funk also, or you might be playing a certain kind of approach to standards. And then when you're playing in these other clubs where we're playing with young players, you're playing things from recordings and all that. Yeah, so it's kind of diverse. And I think in that sense, like in New York, I remember at one point after I'd moved to New York, somebody called me for a gig. Or somebody said, "Hey, a friend of mine called me on the phone. I said, hey, I recommended you for a gig, but the guy decided he wanted somebody who was a little more traditional." I was like, "Oh, okay, well, whatever." And then in the same day or something, someone else called and said, "Hey, I recommended you for a gig, but they wanted somebody who played a little more modern." And I was like, "Wow, what am I just covering this much, area between like 1962 and 1963, like this, it's like, so it's kind of like in New York, I think people do tend to get typecast more, and you don't get called for those kind of gigs. And, to some extent that's fine, because I think you find your voice that way. You find really how you want to play, and you find the people who want to play with you. But I also think, especially for a young player coming up, it's really a great opportunity to, kind of try a lot of different things.
It was like that when I was coming up in Atlanta. It was like that. I mean, It was a big city, but, the scene was relatively small, and I did all different gigs. Like you said, I played in black clubs, white clubs, and and some of my mentors I had some really good mentors that were great players too. So I was fortunate.
Yeah, I think, and that's kind of,
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's kind of the way it was in Cleveland. I think it's often that way in smaller towns. There's usually 3 or 4 kind of local heroes who get a lot of, who get whatever attention there is to be got. Nobody gets famous in jazz, but, those are the people who are really, like the city knows those are the jazz names that they go to all the time. And you get to play with those guys, and then with house bands, and then, just a variety of things. So that part was really valuable.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, my drummer in my trio, Justin Watt, he's from Cleveland.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he lives in Asheville, but he's a younger generation, younger than us. I don't know how old you are, but he's about 20 years younger than me.
63.
Yeah, I'm 6. I'll be 62 in November. So yeah, we're about the same.
You're just a kid. I remember when I was 62.
Yeah, you don't look a day over 62, by the way.
Wow, thank you. It's the blurriness. The blurriness really helps with that.
Yeah, the blurry background sets the stage. Yeah.
I need a blurry foreground. That's the next level. So
I think that could be arranged, actually.
Yeah,
if you
probably
really want it.
Yeah, just put a little Vaseline on the lens. So yeah, but So I there's always, and there's been a steady bunch of people coming through. Nowadays these scenes are built sort of often more around the college in town. So in Cleveland, it's the Oberlin has a great jazz department.
Yeah, one of my mentors from Atlanta teaches there. Dan Wohl teaches at Oberlin.
Oh, really? You were to study with Dan? Oh, he's amazing.
Amazing. But I went to hear him play
Yeah.
In fact, I got a job working as a barback in the bar where he was playing regularly.
Oh, wow.
So I could hear him play every night.
Yeah, he's a great pianist and organ player. Yeah.
He's a monster player. His wife, Carol, is from Cleveland. Carol Vito.
Right. That's why they moved there. That's right. I think for her family. Yeah, he teaches at Oberlin, and they bring in a lot of great players who teach. Billy Hart's at Oberlin. Anyway, so I think that generates sort of interest and a steady stream of younger players coming up who are going through that community.
Yeah, really great. So, so I know you've played with so many great players yourself. I mean, and you've got your recordings. You've got some great players on your recordings. A lot of original music.
Yes.
So, I mean, how did that happen? Was that a result of just moving to New York and getting to begin to play with all these people?
Yeah, I mean, so when I first made my first record, which was a record for Palmetto Records called Handmade,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
oh good, yeah, it was. I was at the time I was playing kind of half steadily with Tom Harrell and his group, and I was also playing a lot. I was subbing at the Vanguard for the big band. I sort of did it in between Kenny Werner and when Jim McNeely came back. So I was the main sub there for 2 years, and so that was every Monday night. And so I had these kind of relationships. And when I was putting that record together, I kind of took. Brian Blade was somebody I played with a lot at that time. I was on some other people's records with him, and he just came to my he came over to play a session once. Somebody just brought him over, and he had not been living in New York that long at that time. And so when I did my record, I called the people that I knew who were some of the strongest and some of the best known players that I was working with. And that record was Ugano Kegwa on bass, Steve Wilson on alto saxophone, Tom Harrell on trumpet, and Brian Blade on drums. So
Couldn't you get some good players?
no, it was an honor to have all those guys and to play with them. And then over the years, I did a lot of records or I did like 4 or 5 records for Palmetto, or I did actually about 6 when all was said and done. But from that time period, at that time, if you had a record deal, you kind of had a relationship with a company. It sounds like something really from the past, but because it doesn't really happen that way very much anymore. Although, a few people, if you have a Blue Note record deal, I guess maybe you get more. You get to do more Blue Note records. But at the time, I knew I was going to do a bunch of records for them because there was always another record in a year or two. You would make another one, So it was nice to have that help. And they would help you publicize it, of course. And so that was a really nice benefit of that era. And so over the next 3 or 4 years, I always had a quartet that I was playing with on gigs, and I would do, sextet, quintet and sextet on the recordings usually. So I did the next record was one called Communication Theory, and that was with Chris Cheek and Steve Wilson again, and Ugana again, and Brian Blade again, and Sam Newsom was also on some of that, a great soprano player. And then, over time, they were just people that I had relationships with. I played a lot with Dick Oates in the 90s and into the 2000s. And Nashit Waits is on one of them, a great drummer. So yeah, it was just a lot of those people over time. Some of them I had been on gigs with them in different contexts, playing with them in someone else's band, or that's how we initially met. Or sometimes, in the case of Tom, I subbed in a lot of different bands of his over the years. So
nice. I noticed you've got somebody from South Carolina on your last album here, Ken Salters.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot he's from South Carolina.
It's about an hour and a half from where I live here in South Carolina.
Oh, wonderful! That's terrific. Yeah. Kenneth is great. He's doing a lot. I saw that he was just he's on Rufus Reed's next record, and he's a great great player. Yeah, really. Definitely.
So, yeah, absolutely. So, well, I wanted to ask you about your book. Go ahead.
No, I just said Kenneth lives fairly close to me. I haven't seen him in a while, but he lives.
Yeah, I haven't talked to him for a long time. Tell him hello if you see him. Run into him.
Yeah, I will definitely
contact him. So maybe he'll do an interview with me too.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, he can.
We reach out to lots of people doing this.
Yeah, that's great.
Actually, this is supposed to go live. I mean, not this interview, but the podcast is supposed to go live today, as a matter of fact. So,
oh wow, good for you. Have you done a bunch of them?
I've just got a few episodes lined up. You're my second interview, actually. I interviewed Ron, who's my drummer in my trio, but you're my second interview. I've been, remember I asked you about this a long time ago, and we
right. I remember you did mention it. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Sure enough, it happens.
Yeah, there you go, man. Yeah. So make it so.
Yes.
So I want to ask you a couple more questions. I want to ask you about your I want to ask you about your books. Like, what led to you writing these books? I started writing a book myself several years about jazz, and then I found your book. And I'm like, well, he already did it, so I need to do it.
That's why the important thing about writing books is try not to read any
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So I
exactly.
mean, because it's funny, a lot of times people will say, "Oh, I have your books. What other books do you recommend?" And to be dead honest with you, I don't really read a lot of jazz books, and I
Oh,
never. That's not how I learned, myself. So,
I have a
but
whole
I,
lot of other jazz books, and I never read them, but I use
yeah.
yours because
Well, thanks.
it's
I'm
practical.
glad I'm glad I made the cut.
Yeah.
What happened was I was teaching. So I'd started teaching in this program in Holland in 2001, and it was kind of an unusual program where they bring people from New York into this place in Holland, is Groningen, Netherlands. It's sort of a city in the north of Holland, and it's kind of a university town there. Anyway, at one point, the way that program worked, initially they only had 8 teachers, and so you have 32 weeks. So that means you go for 4 weeks a year to Holland to teach, and it was cool. It was fun.
That sounds cool.
Holland is nice. It's Europe. It's really clean and organized, and sort of
Sure.
seems to work.
Yeah,
Anyway,
you can just get a train and go somewhere.
yeah, you get a train, all kinds of things that we don't really do in the U.S. so much. Anyway, have like a functioning government, things like that. Anyway, no, no, let's not go there. I was teaching there so much, and at one point they would have these special weeks where they just say, "Okay, now it's piano player week, so you're going to teach." And and the person who would organize it, a great bass player named Joris Tepe, he would like just fill in your schedule. And so you get there for a week and it might be, okay, you're teaching 5 2-hour master classes and you sort of go to yourself, wow, what am I going to teach about? And so you would kind of, and you were there so often that it would really push you to really figure out things to teach because you couldn't just do your greatest hits every time. So, I would, shortly after that, I started teaching I guess I didn't really have a full-time gig at Queens College until 2009, but I was teaching there a lot, sort of half-time from 2007. Anyway, I was teaching more and more, and I was sometimes doing just these master classes after master classes at this place. And so with a different topic, it would be like practicing or repertoire or, harmony or whatever, so you have to like, and sometimes they would go really well. Sometimes you'd run out of things to say and you repeat yourself or whatever. But I was teaching so much and I was coming back on the plane from one of them. And I was like, you know what? I say some of the things I say often, and it's like, I should write down some of these stories. And, the way I tend to teach is like kind of storytelling. I would tell stories about gigs and I would sort of mix it up. And so the first book I wrote was like that. I tried not to have it be linear because I think the problem with a lot of jazz books is they try and tackle one particular issue. And that's not really how practicing has ever been for me. It's not like, the book of how to practice counterpoint. Okay, well, maybe that would make sense. You could kind of do that. But the way I think more is like, you just need enough to get through like a really strong stretch at the piano for like an hour or two, working on a topic. And so if you have you don't have to start at the beginning and go to the end. So the idea for that first book that I wrote, which was called The Jazz Musician's Guide to Creative Practicing, was I had a little part in the beginning about, okay, here's the theory you need. I think I can condense it, and I got it. I think I can get down to 5 pages, and I couldn't. I got it down to like 14 pages. But basically, it was this really sort of fast whirlwind tour through chord scales, tensions, and basic stuff like the things you need to know to like improvise over chords, and then it was just like, okay, here's rhythm changes. What do we do on rhythm changes? And it's like, I wasn't trying to be complete. I wasn't trying to like, I also think that's a thing about jazz books that to me, that actually puts me off. If somebody's going to give me the whole history of rhythm changes, every, like innovation, all the different forms, and then example after example of like Hank Mobley and blah, 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 and so and so and so and so. Look, a friend of mine wrote a book that's sort of like that, and I think it's great. But I think in those books, you really have to dip in and just take a taste and move on. The problem with some of these books that are so complete is you start reading it and in a minute, you're kind of just overwhelmed with, there's so much material because the amount of information that you need to play it's not always as much new information as just the process of doing it again and again and again, and just feeling
Like you
It's
said,
like
you don't need that much information. I mean, you said you condense it to 14 pages. I mean, if somebody knows that information, that's plenty, man. I mean, that's all you really need to know. You
yeah,
need
and then you fill in with your
yeah,
ears.
you
You
got
know,
to,
I mean, I have especially I teach the harmony book that you held up, which was the third book I wrote, and it's probably the one that has gotten people use the most. And I get it. It's like a very that is a somewhat complete book because it's basically the course that I teach 2 semesters at Queens. So it's like the first half is functional harmony, the second half is non-functional. You know, it's just like so. Um, but with all the anyway, so with my like you said, it's not so much knowing everything in the world; it's knowing some things really, really, really well. You know, it's like I think it's not that it has to be so broad, but it has to be really deep.
yeah, right.
So I think in some ways, those books that are so, that take you through everything with motives or motive development or like the diminished scale or something like that, they kind of overwhelm because you're never going to do all those things.
Exactly.
And
Yeah, it's frustrating. I mean, you want to, I'd like to. I wish I could do all
yeah.
those things, you know. I mean,
Yeah, but I think it's an unrealistic way of practicing. The idea of anyway, the goal in that first book I wrote was to try and say, okay, here are these tidbits. Just pick the ones you like and kind of run with those, and it's like you don't have to be complete. You don't have to read it in order. You can just go topic to topic in terms of what interests you. So that's kind of how I tried to write that first one. The second book I wrote was for singers because I was teaching singers a lot. And I think singers in the world of jazz education really have a hard time because either we dump them in classes where they're doing the same thing as a sax player, only it's 10 times as hard as a vocalist, or we kind of ignore them and tell them they should just be like thinking about the lyric of the song more and things like that. So I was like, that book was about how does a singer like develop good practice habits and use the piano as a practice tool, and if you want to learn to scat or if you want to sing harmony, be able to sing through chord changes, what are the processes that you would go through to understand? Yeah, so for singers it was just trying to figure out how to find a way for them to tackle some of these things, and just actually for them to spend a couple hours a day practicing singing chords. Like if for most singers that would be a huge change in their practice life.
Absolutely.
So as I'm sure I'm sure you've worked with singers that good singers, and the funny thing is sometimes working with a great singer, it's not how much they practice, it's what they've, in some cases it's what their intuitive thing is. So but I think we have vocalists studying in jazz schools, and we have to come up with an approach that's really helpful for them. So that's been a nice thing because I do teach also an improvisation for vocalist class at Queens, and so that's I've seen some students really improve and get so that they're hearing. It's an interesting process because getting them to sing whatever altered tensions and scales and be proactive about making choices about the harmony they sing instead of just waiting to sort of kind of find something consonant with what the piano player is playing is a really interesting process, and I've seen singers go through it.
Yeah, I have a couple of singers that are students. I'm trying to teach them how to accompany themselves mainly.
That's that is, I mean, and that's traditionally where that was a huge difference between vocalists that had that skill and didn't, like Sarah Vaughan and Karen McRae, and and then all the singer piano players like obviously a lot of them were pianists who became singers, like Nat King Cole and Diana Krall and people like that.
And Bob Dorough come to mind.
Yeah, sure. And David Frischberger, who, I mean, I think of him more as a piano player, but yeah. And in contemporary ones, Dina DeRose is a great pianist.
Who's that? I'm sorry.
Dina DeRose, have you heard her?
Oh, yeah, I haven't heard her, but I know the name, but I haven't heard her.
Yeah, she's amazing. I mean, singing, playing lines and singing them, and it's pretty. She's a great singer, but she started as a piano player, so, but I think that's a powerful tool. If you started as a piano player and then you go and then you start singing, then you have a lot of harmonic knowledge, you're hearing lines, there's just so much going on.
For sure. I grew up in the church, Southern Baptist church, so I grew up singing from day one, singing hymns, and my mom and dad both sang harmony. My mom played the piano, my dad directed the music, and so I grew up hearing all this harmony. They both sang harmony parts, so I mean, I was doing that before I even thought of playing the piano.
Wow,
I think
that's great.
that helped me have some kind of sense of harmony.
Definitely. Yeah.
You know? And that's
Yeah.
missing. You can't get that anymore. I mean, you can, but not the way it was. When I was
Mm.
growing up.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of players who come from the church to this day, and it's an interesting influence on jazz. It's funny because as the church player, as like sort of gospel music has developed and evolved, you can see the influences, like the drumming, for example. Like drummers, you take somebody like there's a great drummer Rudy Royston who
Yeah,
plays a lot around
yeah.
New
He was
York.
here. He came down to Furman, where I teach. I'm an adjunct at Furman. He came down
Oh,
with
great.
Dave Pietro a couple years ago.
Okay, yeah.
Played together.
So Rudy comes from well, and so does Brian Blade. I mean, both of those guys come from church playing, and but I can really hear it sometimes in Rudy's approach, some of the gospel kind of chops things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anything else you want to talk about? I'd like to hear more about
We got
your composition. I've got plenty of time. I'm not. I mean, I don't want.
whatever you want, however you.
I'd like to know what you. Well, first of all, a lot of this podcast is for students, like young students, that want to learn something about jazz. So I'd like to ask you to speak to that a little bit. But
sure.
But I'd like to. Part of that, I'd like to know something about your process of composition. Like, what do you think about when you're
Sure. Okay, so like starting with the composition thing. So I think when I teach composition, I mean the thing that I always there's an appendix to the there are two appendices, I guess, as I say that word, in the Jazz Harmony book.
Yeah.
One is about just how everybody can develop basic arranging piano skills at the piano, because you need to use it as a keyboard instrument. But the second one is just called Tips for Composers, and it sort of talks about my process with composing, which was I always liked writing, and so I always wrote tunes coming up, and this goes back to some of those early Palmetto records in a way, because the first record I did, I had I just took I called all the people I knew who are some of the best players in town, and I took the tunes that I had that I've been playing for the longest that I knew all worked, kind of. So then that was fine for the first record, and it went pretty well. And then the second record, you have to write a whole bunch of new music for. And granted, I mean, I had a year and a half to do it, and now it seems like you could write 10 records in a year and a half. But at the time, I got really blocked. I sort of got it in my head, and I'm like, oh, I used up all the tunes that were the easy tunes. Now I'm going to have to write harder tunes or whatever. I have to write new tunes. And so I kind of got mentally blocked about it. And I found it very hard to write music at that time. And so when I was doing that, I kind of started analyzing my process. And one thing I think about composing is, look, when we ask people to practice, and we don't say, okay, wait until you're really inspired. And if you're inspired, sit down and practice. But essentially, that's a lot of people's process for composing. They kind of wait until they feel it or they have some idea or something. And, there's a few, I would say that there's many differences between me and Johann Sebastian Bach. I'm not,
sure?
I have no delusions of grandeur here. But one thing I would guess is that Bach didn't wait to be inspired. I'm sure he was inspired a lot. He certainly had a great batting average, but he did a lot of things that were about writing every day. So like he has 407, however many they are, chorales, right? And he wrote the Well-Tempered Clavier and Prelude and fugue in every key. So you can see he has kind of this process that's really thoughtful, and obviously there's inspiration that happens there, but I think the fact that he was writing every day is really a valuable sort of insight into his process. So my goal with writing was to get through this mental block. There were two sides to it. One side of it for me was sort of realizing that, okay, so this comes from, I used to want to be a fiction writer, so I spent some time in school trying to write fiction. And it didn't work out, sadly. But I read a lot of those. You did too also? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's but I read some of those books about how to write. Like there's a book by Anne Lamott called Bird by Bird. There's like the letters from, Vincent van Gogh. There are all these, there's sort of a literature of unlocking your creative self, and some of it's like a little bit, sort of self-helpy, and some of it's, it's all varied. And some of those ideas, one idea that I got from that kind of literature was, write anything, write what wants to come out. Like what's happening if you're mentally blocked, like I was, um, is that you're sort of editing yourself before you when it's just the first idea is coming out. And what you have to do is you have to write tunes. You have to write bad tunes. You have to write tunes. Better to write. I have so many students. I'll say in the beginning. A lot of times people have like the first 3 bars of a tune, and they have like whatever 20 or 30 of these like little fragments that they can't finish, and it's like, well, write, like take one of them and write 3 different endings, just like decide it's going to be a 7-bar tune. That's also possible. You can have short tunes. There's a lot of interesting short music that exists in the jazz literature. So you have these approaches. So like finish it, like just have the thing come out. So one thing that I noticed that when I had this mental block was that I was, the first record was more lyrical. The Handmade had like more lyrical songs in it, and the things I was writing were more kind of repetitive rhythms, and they sounded more edgy in a certain kind of way. And I was sort of trying to avoid writing those things, and so I just would write whatever wanted to come out and try not to judge it. So part of it was just about letting myself write, and then the other thing that was really helpful to me at the time was I made a list of all the kinds of tunes I could write. So you could write a blues that never goes to the 4 chord. You could write a blues that has 11 bars. You could write a blues. There's a great blues by Bill Stewart called 7.5, which is 7.5 bars. It's 7 bars of 4 and 1 2/4 bar. And the main thing to write that song was to have that idea. It's actually, it's a good tune. It's like it's a little riff, like it's like a blues riff. But the thing that makes it really such a strong composition and such a strong, sort of vehicle for improvising is that it has this weirdo form with this 1 2/4 bar in it, and that's what the song sort of becomes about. So I think so for me, like just writing down this list of all the kind of tunes I could write. And there's 2 sides to this list. So one side is just a list of all the tunes you could write. You could write a modal tune. You could write a modal tune in the Phrygian mode. You could write a tune that's like, kind of like a counterpoint exercise where the 2 lines follow each other, like Chasing the Bird, or Clock to Vigenstein is another tune, the bebop tune that does that. You could write a tune that's based on 1 chord, like Milestones. You could write the newer of the 2 milestones, the modal milestones. You could write a tune that's all about 2/5s going in half steps or something. Whatever. You could have a tune that's all major chords. You could write a tune that's based on a tone row, like Bill Evans wrote T T T T, and the blowing for the T T T T T, and the 4 T's is all major chords. So you could have
is what?
They're all major 7s.
Yeah, right. Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, so it's like you could do any of these things. Like you could just pick something and do it. And the thing about picking a musical idea is once you have this kind of strategy or this kind of plan, then you just try and fulfill the plan. And it takes a lot of the pressure off the writing. I think in that sense, it becomes more like Bach, like sitting down to write a fugue every day. Like you have like a structure, and you don't like have that blank page like fear thing that happens when you don't know what you're going to do.
Inspiration. You can't rely on inspiration. It comes and goes.
Right. You have to have, and the thing is, your inspiration kicks in as you work on it. So, like I said,
exactly. Yeah, that's what I noticed. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So like I said, there's 2 sides to this thing. One side is like imagine a thing you could write, and actually, there's a lot of examples for that. You can take a favorite tune of yours, like let's say you really like the song Nefertiti by Wayne Shorter. Well, I could analyze that. What is Nefertiti? It's like one long line that has a lot of fourths in it, and it sort of starts with this idea, and then it fragments and repeats the fragment. Okay, I can do that. I mean, it's not going to sound like that. Probably won't be as good as that necessarily, but the point is I can write something that uses the same plan. I could use a strategy. Wayne doesn't own that strategy. Nobody owns the strategy for the songs they write. Usually you count on yourself to intuitively come up with this kind of overarching plan for your piece, but you could do it non-intuitively. You could do it just like trying to, pick a thing and work. Anyway, so like I said, there's two sides to this list. One side of the list is those kind of plans, like is musically derived ideas, things like write a contrafact based on, Secret Love or something. And then the other side of the list is process. So for process, you could say, okay, I'm going to write down a bunch of chord names, put them in a hat and pull them out randomly. That would be a process idea, right? It's not so much the what you're writing, it's the how you're writing. I'm going to try going back to the other room to see if it works. I think the problem was
some hacking going on in the other room there. Hacking.
Well, my wife is up. She's doing various things.
That's great.
So it's a little unfair to take over the whole apartment. So yeah, this is. I think this is going to be fine. Okay, so let's keep going. Plus, you get all these different views of my blurry world. Okay. Yeah. So okay. So that's it. So the process ideas are things like, not that these are all good ideas for students. Don't take drugs. But like if you were going to say, okay, I'm going to stay up all night and then write the first thing that comes into my head, or I'm going to write away from the piano if I'm a pianist, or I'm going to start to make up the first line by singing it. So those are process ideas. Those are ideas where you take something, the how of what you do, and you experiment with it. And, again, that's also something that people don't do. It's kind of amazing how little we vary the actual process by which we write. Yeah. So even one of them, I wrote one tune this way a long time ago. Make 4-bar units. Like, so, you divide a line into 4 bars, right? And then you write a melody, then write the bass notes, then fill in the chords, then write the next 4 bars. Even doing that, which is not incredibly radical, right? But just not sitting down and writing the harmony and the melody at the same time, it's going to generate a different result. So I think all these things are things that you can do which will help you have more options when you're in a compositional mode. And that's what I really encourage my students to do. I'm teaching a class right now about it's an ensemble where people write for it. But to be honest with you, they're so self-generating that they haven't really taken up too many of my ideas, but that's also fine.
But because they're working on it.
Yeah, I mean, they just bring in tunes every time, and they don't seem to have any trouble writing lots and lots of music. So that's awesome. Yeah. Again, I'm not saying it's bad to write intuitively. Writing intuitively is great. It's just, you want to write whether you have an intuitive idea or not. And I think that's the main thing for composing. But you also said, you also asked me a question. You said that this is a podcast that you're aiming in part for younger players.
In part, yeah, partly, yeah, for younger players that are interested.
Yeah, the only thing I would say for younger players is, specifically about that is I forget, I think it was Joey Barron. I saw a little video that he posted at one point, great drummer. And he said what he did was, if he was really interested, because look, you have a tendency to hear more music that's contemporary to you than music that's from the past. Sure. And especially now, there's so much past, so it's like, and nobody listens to music dutifully because they're supposed to. I mean, I guess we do that to some extent, but it doesn't really take. So for years, when I was a kid, when I was coming up, the first players I loved Oscar Peterson because he was bluesy and it swung and he had great chops and everything. And then I really liked Wes, kind of for similar reasons. So when I was 12, I liked Wes, Oscar, and Ben Webster, and those were the only. And I had 1 or 2 records. My dad had 112 Oscar Peterson records. He was a huge Oscar Peterson fan, but there were 2 that I liked, and those were the 2 I listened to. And so that's kind of how. I mean, I got into jazz pretty early, but as you develop, what I wanted to say was at early on, somebody told me that Louis Armstrong was important, but it wasn't my thing. I didn't really pursue it. I don't think I think when I was in my 20s, I started to really appreciate Louis Armstrong, or 30s. It's like, so now, of course, I love Louis Armstrong. And a lot of the players that I kind of skipped over,
Sure.
I have a huge appreciation for. I was not a huge Hank Jones fan.
Yeah.
But that's because I wanted to play like Herbie, So I was kind of young. When I was younger, I was focused on a certain sound, and things that were not part of that weren't things I really knew how to access. But over time, even from teaching this class, from teaching harmony for the last, God, how many years is it? It's almost so like for 12 or 13 years, and writing a harmony book, it gave me a lot more appreciation of Hank Jones, because he's such a harmonic genius, So anyway, I think what Joey Barron said in the post that I saw was, he said, start with whatever you like. Like if you like Coltrane, great.
Yeah.
Like Coltrane. But then see if you can go one step back. If you listen to Coltrane from like his quartet and you love the energy and the feeling of that, then maybe you can check out Coltrane with Miles, from the Kind of Blue period, and then you start to hear Coltrane with Red Garland, and Coltrane with, Wynton Kelly, and Coltrane with Cedar Walton, and then maybe dig back and see who Cedar Walton and Wynton Kelly are, and it's like, I was teaching at this one school in Holland again, and we used to have to play a lot of music for the students and talk about it. And I was playing Smoking at the Half Note, Wes Montgomery with Wynton Kelly and Paul Chambers and Jimmy Cobb. And this one student was really rebellious and kind of, I hate this just sounds like jazz vocabulary. I'm like, oh, well, I don't know what that means exactly, but okay. I was like, well, what music do you like? And he said, I like Miles Davis from like the middle 60s. And I was like, this is Miles Davis band from three years earlier. Wow. So that is the cutoff for you. You just can't stand anything that is before Herbie and Ron Carter and Tony Williams. That's that's awful. It's awful if it's like it. Anyway, so I think the trick is to kind of keep going back, because the thing about, if you imitate I don't know, Brad Meldau or something, or I don't know, somebody more contemporary than that, Robert Glasper or James Francis, who's more contemporary than Robert Glasper, you might know that little tip, that little part, something about how James Francis sounds, but you actually don't know anything that James Francis knows. Like, he knows a lot about those guys, at least for sure, the people who come immediately before him. And presumably, actually, he probably knows something about Art Tatum. He's got big technique, So I don't know. I think in general, you want to try and trace things back as much as you're capable of, and try, to stay open to those ideas. The other thing is, I think it's really important. I mean, I never really, this idea just came to me, so I'm it's not something I say all the time, but I do think that you want to try to, so sometimes I've had students that find playing standards kind of boring.
Yeah.
And I think it's because, I mean, it can be for a lot of reasons. I mean, maybe those standards don't speak to their contemporary sense of music as much. Like, obviously, If I Were a Bell comes from, the movie and Broadway show Guys and Dolls, which is pretty old. It's a long time ago at this point. But I think try and locate the boredom in how you're playing it, and not in the material itself.
Yeah, right, sure. Right.
I'd say that's my one real piece of advice. Because the thing is, if I go hear a jam session where a bunch of people are playing How High the Moon, and they're just all reading their iReal apps, on their phones, I think it's pretty boring too. It's like, it's not like I want to, for me, the challenge of that material is given that it's really known material, how do we find other things on it? Like, how does it feel?
Fresh.
Yeah.
You make it fresh. Yeah, right. Sure.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is digging deeper into harmony and digging deeper into rhythm and trying to understand, so I continually go back to, whatever, Branford Marsalis playing on these tunes, or whoever, like different contemporary players and different older players. You put on I have a student that was transcribing a Kenny Durham solo. Oh my God, like his time feel and like the notes and everything. It's just killing, And so, I do have certain players, Tom Harrell being one of them, who when I hear them, it sort of reestablishes my faith in like straight ahead jazz as a powerfully communicative art form, because I think he is, whatever that means, he is like a kind of mainstream jazz trumpeter, but he manages to extract so much meaning out of playing a line over chord changes, and so much freshness and kind of in the moment feeling, and that's what encourages me as a player to keep on trying to do those things.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I agree with you. That's a great tip, or a great suggestion for players.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with Frank Kimbrough about this several years ago. I came up to New York and I spent a couple of days with him, taking some lessons with him.
Oh, that's great.
It's been about 7 years ago, and it was just great. We had a conversation. He said, I used to think that Fats Waller was like a clown, but he said, all of a sudden I heard him, and I was like, wow, this guy is amazing,
Yeah.
I mean, we don't take some of that stuff seriously sometimes, But
yeah,
right, you go back and listen to it. There's so much depth there,
Yeah, I mean, I had an experience that I always think of for this. I was in New York, and I was at the Vanguard, and I was listening to a band, and it was a band. I won't say whose band it is; doesn't really matter. But Miller was playing piano, and I think Roy Hargrove was in it. I forget exactly who the band was, but it was like a great, like really terrific, all great sidemen. I don't remember the bass player and the drummer, but they were, monsters. They were really great players on the scene. And I was listening to it. I was in the back of the room, and for the first set, and it was like stuff I kind of, it was a modal tune. There's this, that, the other. I was kind of bored. I wasn't really that into it, and I was like, yeah, it's really good, but it's not holding my interest. And then the leader came over to me on the break, and he said, "Hey, do you want to sit in?" And I was like, "Oh wow, sure, okay."
Wow.
And so I moved up closer to the band for the second set, and I heard the whole second set. He actually never had me sit in, so that's like the sad part. I guess the sad part of the story. But it was nonetheless a great lesson, because I sat I sat in the Vanguard. You can sit right up next to where the drummers play, and you're almost right on top of the band. So I was like in the first row for the second set, and I don't think they played 100% different. I think it was more or less the same kind of music and the same kind of level, but I was hanging on every note. I was watching Mulgrew like the whole time. I was like thinking, man, that comp was so perfect. I couldn't comp like that. So it's like, instead of looking at it as like from the back of the room, like a critic, I was sitting there right on top of the bandstand. Like I had to go play the next moment. And it was really enlightening to me, because all of a sudden this thing that I was kind of, meh, not so excited about, I was really riveted, and I was like, holy shit, that guy is playing the heck out of what I mean. I love Mulgrew. That he was a huge influence and a real favorite piano player of mine. But still, you have to show up, like, you just emotionally, and you have to be present, and you have to not just be casual about this thing that we're doing, that, when you hear somebody do something, that's what you're saying. So like when you hear, like when Frank, talks about hearing Fats Waller and really hearing it, yeah, that's how I feel. You listen to things that you might have thought, it's good. It's not earth shaking. And it's like, yeah, but what does it take to be good? I mean, what does it take to play with that kind of smoothness, or that kind of a time feel, or that kind of a sense of, being locked in and really connected to the other members in a way that makes them.
You said the word. I like that word, presence.
Yeah.
I remember reading an interview with Keith Jarrett. He said that's why he liked having Gary Peacock and Jack Deason. They always show up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's what it's about, If you just up there, we call it phone. If you're just up there phoning it in,
right?
You do that, and like you said, you're standing in the back of the room. You sort of had an attitude about it. You weren't like actually involved in the music. For some reason, you weren't present. But when you made that decision, whatever that decision was, and you became present to the music.
Yeah, I've had that experience many times.
Yeah.
Like things that you think get in the way of your appreciation of the music a lot. Or with me. I always liked Wayne Shorter's quartet, like conceptually, and I love Brian, because I played with him a lot and I know him for years. And so that band, I used to think the first time I heard him, I thought, oh, this should be more like Danilo should play more like Herbie. He plays kind of a lot. It seems like Danilo is sort of the center more than I think would be right or something. It just seems like I just always had that idea that Danilo is playing kind of a lot. And then I was listening to them, I remember at this one concert, and I heard myself say that. I heard like the voice in my head say, oh, yeah, there Danilo goes again. He's playing a lot. And I was like, and the other part of my head, the next voice in my head, not that I usually have these conversations in my head, but I just said to myself, why don't you just shut up and listen?
Yes.
And I remember like just being absolutely blown away. Like there's a reason why, sometimes people have an attitude about somebody in the band. They have like look, I've always thought Danilo is a great musician and he's a nice guy, good, really phenomenal player, incredible comper. But, I always thought, just taste wise, it seems like he plays a lot. That's it. That was like, it's not a terrible thing to think about somebody, but it was in my head. So it interfered with my just appreciating that, Wayne hired him and continued to hire him and likes what he's doing. It's like you don't have to say, I mean, there was a period where Wayne was playing less and Danilo was playing a lot. And that's just how that band functioned.
Oh, yeah.
But that's Wayne's call, and I couldn't have more respect for anybody than Wayne Shorter. So it's like, so why do you think you have to be an editor and like make comments in the back? It's like, I think a little bit it's about staying humble, and just saying, it's here's this thing, let me just appreciate what it is as it unfolds and try and dig it, instead of like trying to correct it, so I think anyway, for me, I remember when I had that revelation and the rest of the night was like totally different music. Again, a lot of it's what you bring.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Actually, you mentioned Dave Pietro a second ago. I used to do some clinics with him where we would travel and play duo, and then we would sometimes do a clinic.
Nice.
And I remember something he said at a clinic, which I always thought was an interesting idea. He said, "Put on a piece of music that you don't know, like a recording or something, so like I don't know, some Bartok piece you never heard before." And he was talking to students, and he said, "Try and listen to the whole piece, and don't decide whether you like it or not." Because usually we make that decision in the first 30 seconds of the piece. He's like, can you just put off deciding how you feel about it in terms of like or not like? Yeah. It's so anti, Facebook, like, like, or love, like, hate, whatever. But we have a tendency to really hear everything through that lens. And he said, it's not necessary to hear music entirely from the standpoint of what you are in the music. You can just take it in and try and hear it for what it is instead of for what you think it ought to be. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. And I use myself as an example because it's very easy to have that experience. I would say people often listen to music and have a tendency to confirm the story they want to tell. If it's somebody you love, you're going to be like, oh man, every note is like just perfect. And if it's somebody you're less fond of, you're kind of like, there they go again, doing that thing I don't really want them to do. And it's like, yeah, but that's not written in stone. That's you. You're bringing that to the table.
That's and your mind works kind of, once this is between on, off, and yes, no, I like it, I don't like it. Your mind just does it all the time. And once you make one of those, whether it's your decision or whatever it is, however you get to that state, once you're there, it's hard to see it. And
you can't see it anymore for what it is. I mean, there's a great quote from John Cage where he says he tries not to like any music, because then it's like, then there's going to be music he doesn't like that's the opposite of it, and he doesn't think that's valid. So it's like, don't like anything too much and don't hate anything at all. It's just like, and obviously John Cage had a pretty wide the other thing he said that I really liked was, and I don't know what this one means exactly, but I like it anyway. He said, which is more musical, a truck driving past a a factory or a truck driving past a music school where people are practicing. I don't know. I just kind of like the image of like, it's sound. It's all sound, baby. I guess that's it. I guess that's his larger.
Challenging that sense of preferences that we have. Like you get preferences. I like this. I don't like that. So it's a challenge to your thinking about what's good and what's bad, like you said.
Well, no, how many times have you heard some music that you heard before that didn't really kill you or that killed you?
Right.
And then you listen to it again and you don't have quite that same reaction. But I think that experience that Frank Kimbrough was, and you're lucky to have spent time with him. He was a tremendous piano player, and it was such a horrible loss to the jazz community that he passed so early. Anyway, but that experience that Frank was describing, I think is a pretty common one. Like suddenly hearing something and like with like the scales fell from my eyes. I could see it for what it really is. I do think that happens all the time. And for me, especially in a teaching context, because I have to say, I probably listen to music more at schools and with other, than I do sometimes just putting on music at home. I haven't been doing that quite as much lately. I'll hear something again. Recently was this Kenny Durham solo, and it's just like, oh my God, that was like so happening, and it was like, and I've always liked Kenny Durham, but it's not like he's a focus of somebody I've listened to. And every time I hear him now, I'm always blown away, and I think, oh, I really need to study more Kenny Durham.
Yeah.
So.
I feel the same way about Lee Morgan. Actually, I heard Lee Morgan. I saw that documentary about him.
Yeah, that was nice.
Paid a little bit of attention to him on some recordings that I heard, and I was just like, "Wow, this guy's like a genius, man."
He was always like my favorite. That was my, if I had to name a trumpet player, it was always Lee Morgan's the guy. That was the one that I always.
When he could come, it's just you go like, how did he think of that? Like how did he come up with that? So, anyway,
yeah,
it's great. I think I don't always listen to music often either anymore, like I used to all the time. But I think part of that makes it a fresh experience for you too. If you're not constantly listening, and then you hear something, it makes it fresh, right? It's like if you don't play for a few days and then you sit down at the piano, it's like suddenly it's fresh, in a way.
I agree. That can certainly work that way.
Yeah. Well, man, this has been just great. This has been just great talking to you.
Pleasure.
The time, and this has just been a great conversation. And I think this is a lot of valuable stuff has been said for not just for students, but for students and for listeners, for all of us. For me, I learned some great stuff today.
Me too. Well, great. I'm glad. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I like I really enjoy your perspective, and hopefully this will make us both famous household names in the world of podcasts.
Well, that's the whole intention.
I know. It's all about the fame. It's all about the Benjamins, as they say.
The Benjamins. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going back to this one. This was my original position.
Yeah, there you go.
Now we're back again.
The original Blur.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground in my apartment.
Yeah, we have talked a lot of stuff. Oh, yeah, along with the conversation.
No, we've covered about 10 feet in my apartment. Although in New York apartment, that is probably a larger percentage of the space than down in your house, where your place is. But anyway, well, thanks for doing this, and let's please let's stay in touch.
Before we stop, is there anything else you think of that you'd like to add? We've said a lot of stuff here. You've had a lot of great insights. And is there anything else you'd like to say? Where can we find you? Where can we find you?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, davidberkman.com.
I see that you do workshops on Jazz Heaven.
I do workshops on Jazz Heaven. That's a nice, if people are interested in that, that's a nice site. They have, what they do is it's a library of, so you do it live, but then it all gets, they recut it, and I think they put subtitles on it and everything. He's like trying to make a library of jazz clinician stuff. There's a lot of cool people on that, like Mark Copeland and Jerry Berganzi, and many.
Berganzi at Berkeley when I went to Berkeley in 19.
Oh wow! Yeah, well,
in fact, I just wrote to him this morning. I've been out of touch with him. I just wrote to him to see if he might do an interview.
Oh yeah. Well, he's amazing. So there is a lot. If you're interested, jazzheaven.com, and then hopefully, I hope to get to South Carolina someday again. Everything got so curtailed during the pandemic. We're just sort of getting back to I'm just getting back to thinking about traveling around again. I was supposed to go a couple places I went to Europe for the first time, and Japan for the first time in a while. I'm usually in Japan in the winters and summers, and then here and there other places. So, no immediate plans to go to South Carolina. I haven't been. I used to go quite a bit, but I haven't been there.
You're always welcome, though. I have a Steinway.
Thank you.
You come play my Steinway. I have a nice
excellent.
Steinway.
Yeah.
1918 Steinway.
Oh,
it's been rebuilt.
It's a B, rebuilt B.
It's real nice, man. Yeah.
I just got a Steinway for the first time in my life. I haven't.
I got this one for the first time too, a couple years ago. Yeah.
Oh, good for you. Yeah, mine is an L. It's newer than yours, but it's been a process of trying to get it into shape for the last 2 years. So it's almost there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, great to see you, Keith, and good luck with this series.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you doing it.
Okay, take care.
Thanks for checking out Notes on Jazz. If you want to communicate with me, I offer free consultations. Just check the podcast notes for a link. You can also find a link to my website for CDs, downloads, and videos. See you next time at Notes on Jazz.